welcome to Low Carbon Lifestyle. On the previous 10 episodes, I've talked a lot about our emissions and what we could do to reduce them. What if there was a way that we could keep on living the lives we live the way we do, but pay our way out of climate change? If you don't get any further in this episode, I'll simply say there isn't a way to get around climate change just by giving a load of money to someone else. But there is something that could help. It's one of those words that's always hanging around conversations around the climate crisis. And the word is offset. This is something we'll need to do for as long as we have greenhouse gas emissions, which, unless we change, and we change substantially and change quickly, will be for a long while yet. So, episode 11 is offsetting. My name is Tom, and this is a little series about a low carbon lifestyle. Sometimes this whole sustainable living can feel well intimidating, whether it's thinking you need to buy an electric car or install solar panels on your roof. The majority of us can't do that overnight. We can't do that straight away. Or it looks like completely changing the way you live, living off the land or turning vegan overnight, both of which are fantastic things. But for this mini series, we're going to talk through how each of us can lower our emissions in everyday life and what that might look like. So offsetting can be actually a little bit murky. There are promises made, risks taken, endless unknowns, and lots of money moving hands. But actually offsetting is a key part to our future as individuals, as organisations, and actually as a nation. You can see in the plans around net zero emissions by 2050 in the UK that some of that net zero comes from an offset. How much and how much it could be claimed, I mean, that's a more complicated question. So let's dig into it. First, what is an offset? Well, an offset is a way to invest in a project that would reduce emissions. These projects would sell a carbon reduction to you or to an organisation. So let's say, for example, there's a process that currently emits 100 tonnes of CO2, but with some investment, we could reduce that to 50 tonnes of CO2. The company that has the process, they think it would cost about £1,000 to reduce that. So they could sell you a 50-tonne offset for £1,000, or a factor of that, so 1 tonne for £20, for example. Or we could assume that certain trees would take certain amounts of CO2 that absorb them over their lifetime. So you could fund someone to plant trees. They could charge you maybe £2 a tree and tell you over a lifetime it's going to consume 1 tonne of CO2. They could therefore sell you a tonne of carbon reduction for £2. And there are lots of projects where we could easily quantify carbon reduction and give that cost for that reduction. Easy, offsetting. And there are even schemes that try to guarantee to give you exactly what you're getting sold, without risk of mis-selling. There's the verified carbon standard, which is a gold standard for carbon offsetting. And there's even the European emissions trading scheme that puts a price on carbon where countries are trying to trade emissions between each other. And I think we're going to get much more familiar with trading and buying and selling of carbon in the coming years. And all of that could be a really great way to fund climate projects. But we often hear about offsets as a license to emit carbon, a get out of jail free card. Big organisations say they're going to offset a certain amount. We're given the opportunity to offset our flights. Maybe certain petrochemical companies even tell you if you download their app and become a special member of their special scheme, they will offset the fuel that you buy. I tend to take some of those promises with a tiny pinch of salt. For me, what offsets shouldn't be are an excuse for a high carbon lifestyle. Buying your way to globetrotting, to wasting energy, to inefficient machines and gas guzzling cars. Even if the offset your promise could actually reduce global emissions by the amount that you've bought, we're starting from a position of emitting way too much. That offset just puts us back a tiny bit. Just because someone else might reduce their emissions doesn't mean we can keep our emissions high. We need to reduce our emissions and draw down at the same time. So I said at the start that offsetting could be a bit murky. I said that we shouldn't use it to excuse bad behaviour. So simply, should we offset? Well, my answer is simply yes. And why should we offset? Well, we need to find a way to remove all the emissions we currently have. So in the UK, on average, we emit 13 tonnes of CO2 per person per year. And we need to do something about that. We need to reduce how much we emit by maybe asking government to make substantial changes to legislation, make substantial changes to the power industry, to our transport, we could ask them to fund decarbonisation of buildings. We also need to make lifestyle changes to avoid tons and tons of emissions per year ourselves. But to go that whole way from 13 tonnes to under 1 tonne, which is where we need to get to in the next couple of decades, I think we need some help, and I think we need something else. For me, for now, one of the additional weapons we've got in that is offsetting. A little story for you. My great mate, Daly, asked me if it was okay to fly to an interview in Amsterdam as long as he offset that flight. It made me stop and think a bit. My first thought was, yeah, sure, offset it. And then I thought a bit more. I kind of said, what about taking the train to King's Cross, wandering over to St Pancras, and then getting the Eurostar to Amsterdam? You could actually do all that, and it would take about 8 hours door to door from Newcastle, assuming the trains all worked okay. Or you could fly in an hour and 20 with some faff either end, getting to and from the airport. You could even get a ferry to Amsterdam, but maybe that'll take a little bit longer. But my challenge was to take a day to travel, enjoy it, offset those emissions that you would have flown with, but get the train anyway. For me, that's the really lowest carbon way to travel. But if you're interested, KLM, who is going to fly with, even tell you how many kilograms of CO2 a return flight from Newcastle to Amsterdam would be per passenger. 113 kilograms is what they claim. And you could offset that for about £10 on carbonfootprint.com. Maybe you should do that, buy that offset a few times if you're gonna plan to fly. If you're interested, carbonfootprint.com uses that verified carbon standard that I mentioned earlier to calculate how much your money could buy. But my point that I came to when I was talking to Daly was, if we're really serious about emissions, should we just pick and choose that return flight to Europe to offset? Or should we count all of our emissions, count the cost completely, and buy offsets to get all of our emissions to zero? The same website, carbonfootprint.com, will sell you an offset for anywhere between £78 and £160 to offset the average emissions of a UK citizen, 13 tonnes a year. That feels like a no-brainer. Yeah, we should all put about £14 a month into funding tree planting, renewable energy all around the world, into projects that displace coal and oil and gas from power generation, projects that would provide clean stoves to families in developing countries, projects to reforest areas of the planet that we've chopped down, and other carbon reducing activities. You could even look into someone like Ecology, for example, who say for a small monthly fee they will offset all your emissions. Their branding says that you could be climate positive, great phrase, for as little as £1.25 per week. My wife and I have been subscribing to Ecology for about 14 months now, and apparently we've removed 20 tonnes of CO2. Not quite the 13 each that we may have emitted as that average UK person, but nearly there. And the money we have given to Ecology has gone towards protecting the rainforest in Brazil, towards building wind farms in India and Aruba, towards generating electricity from landfill gas, planting trees, including in the UK, to rewilding, to solar power, and to much, much more. I think it's good. Ecology have 3 plans that you could sign up to help reduce your impact. So for me, this is starting to sound really simple. Let's just offset. If you look into how much money you could spend, a tonne of CO2 can cost a big range of prices. So I wonder what it should cost. How much should a tonne of CO2 cost? So an IMF report a couple of years ago suggested that a tonne of CO2 should cost $75, which I guess is around £60. But carbonfootprint.com would tell you a tonne from between £6 and £12, so 10 to 20% of what the IMF said. I mean, why is that? Well, for me at the moment, carbon is cheap because we're still working on the quick, cheap wins, the easy work. A tonne of carbon today is cheap because it is easy to offset. And you know what? There isn't that much demand to offset today. So if we want to have a big impact, how much money could or should we be putting into offsetting? I think that's probably up to you. And obviously I've got some thoughts. A great offset could be investing in your home to reduce your energy demand. For example, if your home was responsible for 5 tonnes of CO2 per year, and maybe it's more than that, then investing to reduce that would keep paying back as long as the house exists, even after you've moved out. Or you could think about selling your car and using that money to get an electric bike instead. That could be some kind of offset. So where the focus of our spare cash should be really isn't for me to say, and I won't assume that I can even say that, but I would encourage you to invest a little to make a start. Maybe join one of the ecology plans to give, for example, £4.50 per month to fund climate projects, with the warning not to see that as a license to live frivolously, more a way to understand that carbon costs, and therefore we should be avoiding it just as much as a recurring bill or an interest on a loan. If your emissions are 13 tonnes per year, then maybe you could budget for £10 a month to go into investing into positive climate contributions. One coffee out at a coffee shop per week, or the equivalent of. I think that would be a good place to start. Okay, thanks so much for watching this episode. I'd love it if you could subscribe to the channel and watch some of the other videos that I've put out. I'd love it if you could get in touch with me. Follow me on Twitter at Tom_Bray, or comment in the video below. Let's try and reduce our emissions. Let's try and make a big impact in the next few months and years.